I have just been watching Thomas Sheridan's Today video, linked in the description below. Good as always, interesting as always. Thomas talks about blocking people who unfriend you on Facebook but who don't block you back. Yes, I've been doing that for a while. He talks about losing friends. I disagree, I suppose, in the terms because they weren't your friends anyway. You know, the term friend is overused in Western society. In a way, it's a form of a gaslight or brainwash. Oh, we've all got friends because we're popular. Look at the people on TV ads and all the friends they have. They're not your friends. You can have cordial acquaintances with people, certainly. I remember when I worked in schools, you would get some staff. Particularly, I remember one school had a group of staff in their late 20s. I remember a student teacher whispered in my ear, he said, if they were students, you'd describe them as insecure. They're probably all watching the Late Late Toy Show now, in between the bouts of IVF, all the rest of it. But anyway, they're not your friends, and these ones tried to act like they were a friendship group in the school. And I remember on one occasion, two of the soy-type men who were with them were firing a frisbee around the staff room, and I said to them, for your own sake, you make sure that doesn't come near me. And I silenced the whole staff room with that remark. Nobody said anything else, but it completely shut down the staff room and the noise that these people were... I used the word people too generously, that they were making. And I noticed that I got spotted by the older staff. I suppose I've gone down a little bit of a tangent about the nature of the people who are teaching now, but I wouldn't go back to teaching. See my video of yesterday. If I went into teaching now, I'd be saying to all the kids, there's a conspiracy out there. You have to kind of fight for yourselves. I told you about the girl in the supermarket last week, 16, and she was totally has the red pill and the black glasses. So the kids are okay. Thomas said a video 2 days ago. He then seemed to get apprehensions about what he'd put in it, but I thought it was a really good video. He was very angry. He was saying people are losing contact with friends and family. What's going to happen to the kids today? I'll tell you from my own experience as a secondary teacher, they'll be okay. The kids will be okay. I can guarantee you that, because the ones who wouldn't have been okay wouldn't have been anyway. But if I've got a 16-year-old girl who's in secondary school at the checkout in Tesco telling me that it's all a conspiracy and only Egypts wear a mask, that's 16. I think that, it gave me heart, and I hope I meet her again. I do hope I meet her again. She admired me for not wearing a mask. The mask thing is very serious. It's very serious, the mask thing. I saw the seriousness of it from the start. It is a test. It is to see, can they pit communities and neighbours one against another. So far they've succeeded, but they'll never do, Thomas talks then about going to live in the woods. Yeah. Yep. Always an option. And it's always there for you, so don't be afraid. Be Mrs. Carmody, don't be afraid. Mrs. Carmody was fearless, and, she was right, although they killed her. The normies killed Mrs. Carmody. Sorry, there's a plot spoiler. But let's talk about conspiracy theories. If you had turned around in 1930 and said that an Austrian immigrant to Germany would instigate a plan to murder 6 million Jews, you'd have been called a tinfoil hat. But it happened. So conspiracies happen. They're out there. There are conspiracies. Of course there are. Time magazine. Thomas refers to this, and he's right. Time magazine is talking now about basically how they conspired with the rest of the mainstream media and the democratic machine to throw the general election in the United States. That is a combination of psychopathic characteristics. The first is who you going to call, and the second is Jupiter's delight. Keep that. Don't forget that, because you can bet your life Donald Trump has kept a copy of that one. I predicted this before the 6th of January. I said that if Trump doesn't get a second term, he'll be the biggest dissident of all. There he is now on the front cover of today's London Times, because their sales are plummeting. If they can't do Orange Man bad, their sales are plummeting. Orange Man, very good for their sales, very good for the viewer ratings and RTE and all of that. But you know, he's gone now, and they're bereft because he was an alpha male, he was a leader, he was a very, very strong character, he had a huge charisma, you know, and then instead we have this senile grey man in the White House. Well, you know, hey, they've got a Democratic Congress, a Democratic Senate and House. California is fully Democratic, has a Democratic governor, and Democratic State Congress in California. And let's see now how the unicorns and rainbows and the rainbows and unicorns are going to show up for them and all the people who supported them. Trump's gone. We, the Trump supporters who are sane, accepted that when the vote was called. I was holding fire. I was reserving my position until we saw how the vote went. But the vote went, and it's a legitimate vote. It's constitutionally legitimate. It's not open to challenge. So that's it. It's not right. It wasn't the right decision, but it doesn't mean that it's not legally legitimate. It is legally legitimate. Trump accepted that immediately because he's not insane either. So that's it. And now we're a month down the line, and, you know, I really, really hope those rainbows and unicorns are just going to materialise. It's been a while, though. I gave Joe Biden 48 hours. I was being fair, but, you know, I'm not sure that the rainbows and unicorns have particularly manifested themselves. Thomas, he had a very witty thing in today's video, that the far right in Ireland are kind of like Bigfoot. Everybody talks about them, but nobody sees them. And I'll go slightly further. If you go on to Twitter, people denigrate Twitter. People make Twitter sound as if it's, you know, a load of rubbish and all full of lulas. Well, there are a lot of lulas on Twitter, yes, but at the same time, there was a reason why they closed Trump's account. Anyway, go onto Twitter, and they are doxing people who they have decided, the lefties on Twitter, who they have decided are members of the alt-right. And what they're doing is they're giving out their names, they're giving out their home addresses, they're putting up Google Map searches or Google Earth or Google Street View searches of their homes. They're talking online about these people's background. They're coming out with an awful lot of stuff about these people. They are remarkably vindictive and intrusive and obsessive about these ones who they have settled on as being the far right. So you will see some mentions of that on Twitter. You won't see any mentions of it in the mainstream media, except easy targets like, say, Gemma O'Doherty and John Waters or certain others. And the mainstream media is relying on rulings of the High Court and Court of Appeal, and in some rare instances the Supreme Court here in Ireland. And they're using those as their background, and that means they can't be sued. So the mainstream media are playing it reasonably carefully with who they decide to identify as the far right. I don't accept that John Waters or Gemma O'Doherty are the far right. Gemma is abusive. John isn't. He's a gentleman and a scholar. But they're an easy target for the mainstream media because they're latching on to court rulings and riding with that. There's one person, be it Twitter, be it the mainstream media, there's one commentator who they've never mentioned, and I won't either. But it's interesting to work out why they won't mention this one person. Nowhere do you see this person's name come up. Not once will you see this individual's name come up. And as I said, I won't mention that person, and it looks like they won't mention that person either. So they're not putting up street views of that person's home or that person's address. They're not talking about that person's background or what that person has done or what court cases that person might have won or lost. And there is a reason for that. And the reason for that is that these doxers, these far left woke doxers, are bullies and cowards. And they're very, very reluctant, whether they're in the Irish Times or the Irish Examiner or RTE, or whether they're just lulas on Twitter, Antifa and all these ones on Twitter. They're very, very reluctant to pick a fight with somebody who'll give it back to them with loose change. That is because they are primarily, whether it's the mainstream media or these ones, alt media, they're primarily cowards. They're also self-loathing. So it's always interesting to look out not for the people who they mention, but for the people who they refuse to mention. And as I said, I'll refuse to mention that particular person just now. Anyway, they weren't your friends. You know, Thomas is talking about friends and family who are saying, oh, you know, he's gone in total tinfoil hat here. And you know, they weren't your friends. You don't need them round. These are strange times. These are very, very hard, unprecedented times. That occurred to me again last night. You know, we have to forgive ourselves. We have to be patient with ourselves. We have to not expect that the things we could take for granted even this time last year. It's now the 7th of February. I was getting ready to pack my bags for a holiday this time last year. That has changed. Somebody online, Miss Jane, Angela, talks about how it's never going to go back to what it was. I agree with her conditionally, but that doesn't mean that we're going to lose. You know, if you look at the Second World War, Nazism failed. If you look at communism, it failed. The psychopaths always fail. That is because the psychopaths are lazy and incompetent. But moreover, psychopaths do not think in the big term. So they will do things impulsively, but they don't say, well, how will this play out in the long term? Because I remember dealing with psychopaths in my 20s, and you'd want to say to them, are you thinking about the implications of what you're doing here? No, because they're psychopaths. But I didn't know that then, because the whole thing about psychopathology has been suppressed. There have been academic studies on psychopathology saying everything that Thomas has said in his 2 books, Defeated Demons and Puzzling People. They're great books. I well recommend them. I have them both in hard copy and on Kindle. But really, Thomas is giving a layman's distillation of studies that were done before the Second World War. I've read some of them as well. A goodie from 1999 that I read was by Robert Hare, Without Conscience. And that is largely repeating what Thomas has put in his books. But it's somewhat more academic. I liked that. I've read some other ones. I'll say them in another video if I can remember them. I think I read them in hardback. But they're all really the same thing as what Thomas is saying in his books. You know, don't be expecting miracles from psychopaths. When they eventually end up in a corner, they just fall apart. Or they kill themselves, you know. So, this is what we're in. We're in a psychopathic adventure at the moment. But who is the enemy? The enemy here in Ireland, I identified as being the mainstream media. Because then we have the cheese brains. Thomas identifies them as the cheese brains. That's right. They're the mass who are malleable. Let's look back to the circumstances that led to the outbreak of the Second World War in 1940 and the Holocaust. There was a mass media there that was doing 2 things wrongly. First of all, it was giving too much credit to Hitler and the Nazis. But secondly, it was refusing to ask the awkward questions. Because in Weimar Germany, from the outset of Hitler's rise, there were people there all the time who were calling him out on that, and who were saying this person's a threat to us, this person's a danger to us. But they were not getting covered. So the mainstream media does a disservice through 2 things, by telling lies and by not telling the truth. Now, we're in a different situation today because we have alt media today. They didn't back then. How did you spread the word back then in 1930s Germany? Pamphleting, maybe? Anonymous leaflets. It was very difficult. It's not so difficult now for us, you know. But that doesn't mean that the mainstream media still doesn't have that inroad to normiedom that it so strongly had in early 1930s Germany, whereby it was able to, through default and through omission and through its actions, lead to a situation that led to the outbreak of war and to the Holocaust. The grooming of the normies in Germany to seeing the Jews, to shifting their perception of the Jews being evil, took place in a relatively short amount of time. You know, Hitler was starting that. That was one of Hitler's key themes from the start. But it only began to take hold from the early 1930s onwards. So by 1940, a quorum, a critical mass of German people were comfortable with the notion of a genocide against the Jews. They're denying it now. That's the same way that after this all ends, the people who are COVIDiots and maskers, oh, we'll be denying that. But we won't let them forget. In the same way that after the Second World War, the survivors, the people who called it out, who knew what was happening, did not let, as much as they could, the people in Germany forget what they'd done. We will win this. Maybe I'm ever the optimist here, but we will win this. We won all those things before. We won in the Second World War. We won in the Great War. We won against communism. We will win this. Then what will we be left with afterwards? That's the question. That's the question. But for me, I mean, you can have a scattergun approach to all of these. The politicians and the bankers and the rest of it. No, for me, it's the mainstream media, because I saw how they were lying to support Varadkar. I saw that. It's not even the European Union. The European Union isn't, it's in its way, it's another Bigfoot. It's a Bigfoot for the Alties, the European Union is, because it's not that powerful. If we had politicians in this country who were willing to stand up to the European Union, without saying we're going to do an Irexit, we're not going to do a Brexit equivalent, we're going to stay in the European Union, we're going to have the euro, we're going to set our own terms of how our country is governed. But we have been softened for so long, we've been complacent for so long, that when the challenge came along in 2020, we did not have a government or politicians or a mainstream media who were able to say, look, it's a flu, we'll deal with, we'll issue guidelines, people need to take precautions. No, what happened was that old Marxist thing exploded like a can of petrol, and now we're going to just stand back and let the state take over and the government sort everything out for us. Well, yeah, if you think that's going to be cool, you deserve anything you get.